Hi everyone, my name is Praveen Kumar Peddavakkalam. I am a solutions architect for Oracle Cloud and welcome back to our series about Oracle Cloud VMware Solution. Earlier in this series, we learned how to deploy a public app in a guest VM and access the application via internet using OCI native load balancer. In this session, we will see how to convert the uplink 1 VLAN to be a public facing VLAN and then assign a public IP to the guest VM to be accessible from the internet. For this demo, we will be using this lab environment. You can see that we have an STDC in the Phoenix region within a VCN with CIDR block 10.0.0.0/16. The guest VMs are in the overlay network with CIDR block 172.16.10/24. We also learned from the previous demos that all the VMware management nodes leverage VLANs within OCI. For this specific demo, we will work within the NSX uplink 1 VLAN. Then we will convert the existing uplink 1 VLAN as a public facing VLAN. Please note that this allows all the guest VMs to have the ability for a public IP to be assigned, and the rest of the VMs would not have any internet access. The reason for this is you can either route traffic through an internet gateway or a NAT gateway for a specific VLAN, not both at the same time. From a high level, these are the steps we will be performing during this demonstration. We will first provision a new public IP address within OCI. Then we will associate the public IP address to a private IP address in the uplink 1 VLAN, and we will add a new route rule to the internet gateway in the uplink 1 VLAN's route table. Finally, we will add NAT rules to map the guest VM IP to the private IP, which we will create in uplink 1 VLAN. Let's dive into the demo. I am currently logged into the OCI console and I am in the Phoenix region. To provision a new public IP address, click on the burger icon on the left and click on Networking and IP Management. Make sure you're in the right compartment, then click on Reserve Public IP Address. Provide a user-friendly name to identify the IP. I will name it as Public App 1. You can leave the rest to defaults and click on Reserve Public IP Address. Here we can see the public IP address has been provisioned. Next, to create an internet gateway, navigate to the VCN by clicking on the burger icon on the top left, then select Networking and Virtual Cloud Networks. Select the VCN and click on Internet Gateways on the left. Create a new internet gateway if one doesn't already exist. Here we can see I have already created an internet gateway called IGW-PHX. Now let's navigate to the uplink 1 VLAN by scrolling down and clicking on VLANs on the left. Then select the uplink 1 VLAN and then select the route table associated with it. Here, if a NAT gateway or a service gateway rule exists, those need to be deleted before adding an internet gateway rule. To add a route rule, click on Add Route Rules. Choose the target type as Internet Gateway. For the destination CIDR block, enter the 0 address. And for the target Internet Gateway, select the Internet Gateway we created earlier and click on Add Route Rules to submit. Now we can see the route rule entry for the Internet Gateway. Next, to allow traffic from anywhere within the uplink 1 VLAN, click back in your browser to go back to the uplink 1 VLAN. Then select the network security group attached to the VLAN. Click on Add Rules. Leave the direction as ingress. For the source type, select CIDR. For the source CIDR, enter the 0 address. And for IP protocol, leave it on default all protocols. You can fine tune it to a specific protocol such as RDP or SSH depending on your requirements. Then click on Add. Next, let's map the public IP address to a private IP in the uplink 1 VLAN. Click back in your browser to go back to the NSX uplink 1 VLAN. Then click on Add External Access. Select the public access style. Enter a name for the private IP address. This is optional, but I will name it same as my guest VM, that is OEL PHX01. Next, enter an available private IP address in the VLAN or leave it empty for an automatic assignment. For the reserved IP address, select the public app1 IP which we created earlier. Then click on Add External Access to create the private IP to public IP mapping. Here we can see the mapping. Now let's create a DNAT rule for the private IP in the VLAN to the private IP of the guest VM in the overlay network through the NSX manager. I just RDP'd into my Bastion server and logged into the NSX manager. Then let's select Advanced Networking and Security tab. and on the left click on NAT. For the logical router, select tier 0 from the drop-down if it is not selected by default. Now click on Add to create a new NAT rule. Here, let's set the priority to high. I will enter 1000. For the action, select DNAT or destination NAT from the drop-down. For the protocol, you can leave it to any protocol. Else, you can specify any specific protocol if you want to fine-tune the traffic. For the source IP, let's enter the 0 address. For the destination IP, let us enter the private IP that we created in the VLAN, that is 10.0.0.130. Then, for the translated IP, let us enter the private IP address of the guest VM, that is 172.16.1.2. Let's leave the remaining to defaults and click on Add. Next, let's add an SNAT tool for the guest VM to the private IP. Click on Add again. This time, let us set the priority to 1026. Leave the action as SNAT, else choose SNAT from the drop-down. Leave the protocol to any protocol. For the source IP, enter the guest VM private IP, that is 172.16.1.2. And for the destination IP, let us enter the 0 address. And for the translated IP, let us enter the private IP that we created in the uplink 1 VLAN, that is 10.0.0.130. Let us leave the remaining to defaults and click on Add to submit. Let us scroll down and make sure there are no other SNAT rules for the whole CIDR block, as this mapping always needs to be 1-to-1. Here we can see there is a SNAT rule to the NSX Edge IP. Let's delete this rule. Next, let's try pinging a public DNS from the guest VM. Here I am SSH'd into the 172.16.1.2 guest VM, and we can see that we are able to reach the internet. Next, let's validate if we can reach the guest VM through the public IP. Here I have opened PuTTY on my laptop and established an SSH session to the guest VM using the public IP address 158.101.24.138. Let's enter the username and password. Next, let's check the IP address of the server by running IPA. We can validate that the IP address matches to the guest VM's IP address. We have now successfully assigned a public IP to the guest VM. If you have several guest VMs which require public IP assigned to them, perform these steps for each guest VM. Here are some of the resources you can refer to better understand the OCVS offering and the Oracle Cloud infrastructure. You can also find these URLs in the description of this video. You can always find all the documentation for Oracle Cloud Infrastructure at docs.cloud.oracle.com/IaaS. Thank you for joining us in this session, and we look forward to seeing you in the next session.